I want to talk about two things. I've written them down. Number one is research papers. I get so many questions like Omkar, like research paper, how many do I need? What do I need? So let's talk about EB1A, like, so we can just get into that. So question I have is, how do I excel in the authorship criteria you
Hmm.
mentioned about earlier? And
Hmm.
then, give me some of the tips to write papers, and like someone who hasn't written paper, like somebody like me, dude, I have not written a single paper
Yeah.
which is published. I've written papers for my master's, let's say a 25-page research paper I have written.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not niched. It's just like a project management
Yeah.
plan or something like that. So, how do, let's say, because I was talking to you, you said like your team really helps people, like,
Yeah.
like, how to get into it and stuff like that. Can you talk about it? Like, how many papers should these people write and
Yeah.
how do we go after it? Yeah.
Yeah, so the first question is difficult to answer because it's very subjective of like how many
Mm,
papers you need to have. It's a lot to unpack, man. So if I try and answer this question, it really depends on like how your other criteria are going on for you.
mm, mm,
So in most cases, let's say that you do not have like a lot going on for you, you have like one or two basic things going on for you, then we try and basically use our last 5 or 10 cases as a barometer of like, hey, this is the standard which is getting approved, and we either need to keep maintaining this standard or up it. So
mm,
the longer you wait, the more research papers you'll have to write. That's what like one thing which I could recommend right now. Simply because like a couple of years ago, people would like write 5 papers and be okay with it, versus now you definitely want to do like above 10 if you are
mm,
not like if you do not have like other criteria going on for you. And then there is another aspect to it, which is like where your papers are getting published, like without getting too much details into it. um let's say like like a couple of your papers you want to get published them like just really good quality papers that you want to get into like a Q1 level journal and whatnot. But then they take like 6 to 12 months to get published and whatnot. So essentially you have to figure out where that right balance it in terms of like your timeline, where you do not want to spend too much time just on like one paper, because like if you'll do that, you'll probably be able to write 2 or 3 papers throughout the year, which is not going to be enough. Then the
mm,
second aspect is the money. Like how much money do you want to spend on like getting all of these published? So like that, the first question is like for each profile, we kind of try and figure out like where this profile would sit correct in terms of like the number of papers. But I use like a very generic advice would be is to like definitely do wanna do 10 in most of the cases where
got it.
basically people do not have like other stuff going on for them. So that was like on the first one. For the second one, let me see. Like I have a something. Which one? Sure. Yeah, I have this guy. So this is like I did this once in the past as well, and like people ask me this all the time. Uh,
Yeah.
how do you write?
That's the most common question I get, man. Like, it's
Yeah,
fear.
yeah,
Let
yeah,
me
yeah,
let me be honest, Sahil. It's fear, man. Most people don't like to write. We are not, most people are procrastinators. We just do masters so that we can get a job in America. Let's be honest here. But then I feel there is fear. Like, I think it's simpler than what you need to do, but like most people think like you need to be a writer, you need to be that, a nerd to write, which is really not true in my
yeah.
opinion.
Yeah, no, it's very easy, man. Like, so I'm gonna quickly talk about like what we can do and what we cannot do. Like a general step-by-step guide. But I want to specify like this is a general guide and it may not apply like directly to everyone, because everyone has like various different skills and like expertise and whatnot. And some of the stuff is like proprietary and like part of the program, which I cannot directly share. But I'll try and like give you like some sort of like a quick overview. So number one is okay. So the third slide is what you just said. Like I've never written a research paper. Like how will I do it? So the first and foremost, like the aspect is like just like any new skills, you won't know until you do it. So like you have to get that fear out of your mind, right? You do not want to just think from the perspective like, hey, I've never done this. How will I write 10 papers? So usually, like on first call, people will ask me like, hey, how many papers I need to write? And I would never tell them like you were gonna write 20 papers or 15 papers. And I always tell them like just think about topics and we'll figure it out, because you don't want to scare them right up front.
Mm,
It's like a lot of the effort, because they don't realize like once you write 1 or 2 papers, it becomes super easy, man. Like first couple of papers take time because you're
right.
trying to
Yeah.
get into the groove of like what's the
Writing.
structure and whatnot, right? But once you do that, then it's like super quick. Like most of the people, like probably let's say if they take first 3 months in writing 2 papers, they'll probably be able to write like 6 to 8 papers in another 3 months. Like just 3 times or 4 times their speed. It becomes like super easy. So that's why I say like just don't think from the perspective of like I have never done this. So how would I do it? Like we haven't done a lot of things in our life. That doesn't mean that we can't do it. So like first is that mindset thing. Second is different profile, different approaches. So like a lot of people that I get are also going to be like from the background who like either doing PhDs or like have a research focused background. So for them, it becomes easier to like write the papers. And then a lot of people would be like industry professionals. So basically, they'll typically focus on like practical applications, real world impact, rather than like new research. So that's like two major differences between research paper. One is where you're trying to go and figure out new things based on like what exactly has been found in the past, and one is where you're trying to take some sort of an item which is maybe not new but has a new application, or you did something with a twist on it and kind of gave it a new application. So that's going to be a lot of these people who are going to fall in these industry professional background, because the people who are in the research background, they already know how to that stuff. So I'm going to try and focus more on like the industry professional side, like people who are like doing their first job or like whatnot. So number one, you identify the core topic. So the way to identify topic is you want to think about like some key project or challenges that you have tackled in your role. So think about like, okay, what algorithm I wrote, what exactly I wrote for. And important thing here is to stop wearing your technical hat for a little bit. Product manager actually does a good job at this step one. Most of the product managers that we work with, because they have a product mindset, so they think from the perspective of a product, versus engineers do not have that. They think from the
Mm.
perspective of, right, oh, I just wrote a function in this code. I'm like, dude, I understand that you wrote a function in this code, but what exactly the scope of that entire code is? So you want to think from that perspective of like something that you did and that it kind of like was part of like an innovative project. So for example, let's say if you're a data analyst at a car manufacturing company, don't say worked on data scalability. How did you use it? So basically, let's say you had like a vehicle data pipeline where you basically were getting all this data from a truck, and a lot of people does that at these manufacturing companies, where basically all the data from a vehicle will be passed on to like the backend system, and you want the system to be scalable. You want this data to be processed pretty quickly so that it can flow down into like other services. Like some of the engineers probably would be relating here hard, but you want to basically then come up with this topic of like improving vehicle data pipelines for real-time analytics in car manufacturing. So
Mm.
now what you did was you talked about what exactly are you doing, but then you talked about where exactly are you applying it for. Now this becomes a good topic for your particular niche on like what sort of work that you are doing. Um, the step two is you first and foremost, once you have like the topics figured out, and we go through this together, we figure out like a lot of topics, we discuss, is this a good topic, is this a bad topic, I suggest some ideas, I take their ideas, and then we eventually come up with like a final list of like what we want to go with. Then the next step is like the essay approach, which I usually say. So you
Mm.
do not want to write down a paper, forget about a paper, you picked this topic, right? Why did you pick this topic? So you basically want to jot down all that notes. You want to basically write essay and like create everything in like an essay format. Just write down everything about it, like what did you do, what did ended up happening, how did like it improve the scalability, specifically like in this case. So you want to focus mainly on content and all the main points, and not really worry about everything else. So you basically prioritize your content over your formatting. That's your
Got
goal.
it.
So now you have like an essay. The way you talked about, no, you had like a master thesis of like 20 pages, you jot down your notes and whatnot. That's your step here. So that's
Mm.
like our second step. Then in the third step, what you want to do is think about the educators of this entire thing. Like the educators are basically the supporting elements to this. Like what was the problem, why did you decided to do it? So that becomes the introduction. It's like, hey, we had to do this because if you don't build a scalable system, it's going to do a by cd. So that becomes like your introduction aspect. Then you do like your methodology, like how, what are the tools that you use, how did you do it, like the technical aspect side of it, which you probably already have in your essay. Then you talk about the results, like how this improved, what really happened by like implementing this functionality, like the way you did it. So this is all like the product tech spec, which you'll have in like a Jira definition of done, is like what, why, and how. But you're
Mm.
using that what, why, how in like your introduction methodology and like the results aspect. Um, and then you do a conclusion and whatnot. So these are the things that you then think about from the perspective of like why. why I wrote what I wrote in the essay, and why should someone, like put emphasis on it. So that becomes like your educator. And then of course, like the aspect of it is like you gather all the data from your projects, any case studies that you could kind of present in your case, identify like any trends, what can be improved in the future. Because let's say whenever we develop most of these features, there is always like various level, like okay,